Hello everybody, and welcome back to Week of the Sponge. This is going to be the second episode or little video I'm going to do. Not really keeping track, or I won't be keeping track, but today we are going to do character analysis for secondary characters. So, in the last video, which I posted earlier this evening, I went over main characters. Spongebob, Patrick, Squidward, Sandy, Mr. Krabs, and Plankton. So, like I said, I'm going to be going over secondary characters. So, let's start with Larry the Lobster. He's kind of friends with Sandy. They share a hobby. They work out. They lift weights and stuff. Larry exercises at the gym regularly, like in Ghost Host. He's looking in the mirror at himself and just working out. He enjoys lifting quite a few weights. He lifted the audience stand in that one episode. He was in the anchor toss and Muscle Bob buff pants. So, honestly, and he's also a lifeguard, like, they call him Larry the Lifeguard, Larry the Lobster, and in that one episode called the Krabby Chronicle, they called him Larry the Loser. So, basically just Larry the L word. That's basically how it goes. Anyway, so, basically how it works is Larry's just your typical beach-bummed jock who just enjoys working out. That's basically all I have to say about him. Nothing's really changed about him. He's just always been pretty much the same. Okay, now we're going to move on to a pretty interesting character named Mrs. Puff. Her changes over the times, they've actually been pretty dang interesting, and I think you guys are going to like me talking about this. Basically, Mrs. Puff, she's changed quite a bit. She went from just your typical everyday driving instructor who had a student who just didn't do well. Just every teacher has probably at least one student that doesn't do well. That's SpongeBob for you with Mrs. Puff. However, SpongeBob, over the years, has just really pushed her over the edge. He sent her to jail on more than one occasion. He's caused her major injuries. He's just done so much to torture her. And what does she deserve it for? What? And he doesn't even know, like, seriously. Mrs. SpongeBob is the bane of Mrs. Puff's existence, just like Squidward. Only Mrs. Puff is possibly even worse, nowadays at least. Back in the day, she wasn't too hard on him. Like, she gave him the hall monitor suit. I mean, sure, she regretted it 2 seconds later, but still. Nowadays, she hates him so much. Like, look at the episode Demolition Doofus. Just look at that episode. SpongeBob, basically ruins Mrs. Puff's entire body. He doesn't even care. He, doesn't even say sorry or anything. And basically, she just tries to kill him. Honestly, it does verify everything, but still. SpongeBob, how could you do that to just an innocent person? Mrs. Puff never did anything to deserve going to jail several times and having her entire life and body ruined. So, that was pretty horrible. There's also the fact that nowadays, Mrs. Puff, she doesn't care how SpongeBob gets out of her life. She doesn't care whether he passes her class or whether he dies. She just wants him out of her life for good. No matter what it takes, she'll do anything to get him out of her life. And honestly, I think I might too. So yeah, that's Mrs. Puff for you. Now we're going to get into a character that's even more interesting than Mrs. Puff. Pearl, Mr. Krabs' teenage daughter. Okay. Pearl, in the early episodes, she was a fun, cool, hip, jazzy-like, and sweet, kinda bossy teenage girl. She was sweet to SpongeBob. She liked him. She kissed him. She almost broke him in half by hugging him, not by hurting him. So, she was really nice to everybody. She called Squidward, Uncle Squiddy. So she was just really nice to everybody and a really sweet girl back in the early SpongeBob episodes, which is why I liked her so much. However, nowadays I absolutely hate her for several reasons. Reason number one, she's now a complete backsassing, bratty jerk face to everybody. She screams, she whines, she throws tantrums. Like, did you see the episode where they're trapped in the Bikini Bottom Triangle and she's throwing a temper tantrum because she wants to go to the mall? She's like pushing Mr. Krabs around just because he hugged her or something. And have you seen the Slumber Party? Have you seen that episode? That episode, oh my god, I don't even want to talk about it. But we'll get there, guys. Ho, we'll get there. Anyway, so Pearl is probably the most, like, major transitioned character. So, yeah. Pearl. Anyway, so, yeah. So let's see, are there any other secondary characters I would want to go over? Oh, and by the way, you know how SpongeBob destroyed Mrs. Puff? She ended up being fine at the end. Why? Because SpongeBob always goes back to the reset button. I might be doing a later video on continuity, so look out for that. I might, but I might not. So, let's see. I guess I could go over some other characters. There's SpongeBob's grandma, who's made, I think, 3 appearances. Grandma's Kisses, Pet Sitter Pat, and Blackjack. I believe those are the only 3 appearances. She doesn't really have a personality, so there's SpongeBob's parents. You know what? I think those might be all the characters. I might be missing one, but I think those are all the main characters that I would, want to go over. So yeah, those are the secondary characters. So, I'll see you next time. Waluigi Man 8689, out.